Well, I'm super excited today to have my great friend, Dr. Bruce Wesley, in the house. Pastor Bruce, thanks so much for being here.
Hey, I am so excited to be here, Jarrett. Thank you.
Well, you are someone who has become such a dear friend to me, and I want to say this publicly. I know I've said it privately, and I've even said it to our team. We had you recently speak at one of our staff chapels, and I told them this, that when I first moved to Houston, I knew no one. And I was ready to hit the ground running, but you reached out to me and just became a dear friend, just encouraged me, welcomed me to the city. And you're in so many ways a church father, if you will. I don't mean that to make you sound old, Pastor.
Okay.
You're not old, but you've been in Houston for 30 plus years now?
Yes. 37.
So we're going on 40 years
40
now.
years, something like that.
And you, along with several other pastors, really have worked together to see that there is a sense of, just togetherness, a sense of unity with pastors and churches in the city. And you modeled that for me. And just as you live your life and ministry, I just sense a kindred spirit. And I'm just so grateful for your friendship and your example to me. We're going to get into a little bit about what I'm talking about. But let's talk about your story. What brought you to Houston? You pastored Clear Creek Community Church for 30 years now. So tell me the story. What brought you to Houston and how you started Clear Creek?
Right. So originally, when I was in college, I was coming to the Houston area to come to serve at Cut and Shoot. You ever heard of Cut and Shoot?
I have not.
All right. There's a story to tell. So on the east side of Conroe, there's a little community called Cut-in-Shoot.
Okay.
Yeah, really. And it's kind of the industrial side of Conroe.
Were you leading a cowboy church?
Yeah. Well, you would think it was worse than that, but it was the best of times. It was the worst of times. You know, seriously, I learned so much about God and about ministry and about loving people when it's hard. In Cut and Shoot, I was there 3.5 years before I started my first pastorate. I was an associate pastor there. So if you count that, I'm 40 years in the Houston area. Okay. Then for 6.5 years, I was on the northwest side of Houston at a Baptist church called White Oak Baptist Church.
Okay.
And then we decided to plant a church. And the Lord opened some opportunities to land in League City, where we are now. And so 30 years ago, we planted Clear Creek.
Now, you planted churches when planting churches wasn't the thing to do. You know, now it's cool, it's trendy, everybody's doing it.
I knew 2 church planters.
So tell me about that dream starting in your heart. Why did you say this is what we want to do?
Well, the way that we were really trying to reach lost people was difficult for established churches to do. You know, it was a little, at that day, it was edgy. It wouldn't be edgy at all today. Yeah. But what I didn't want to do is blow up a church. I didn't want to hurt people. And so some wise counselors in my life said, you know what you want to do? You probably should consider planting a church. And I'm like, what is that about? And they actually introduced me to some people who were interested in a church starting in their community. And so we started talking, and before you know it, I'm learning to plant a church. We took all of, get this, 12 weeks from the time I moved into the community till our first service. I mean, today we would tell a church planter, you're insane.
Yeah.
You're brand new to the community.
You don't even know who's there.
No.
What is the community's about?
It was crazy. Lord gave grace where we were ignorant. And we actually had a really good start in spite of all that. But I didn't know, I knew 2 church planters in the city, and we would meet once a month, maybe every other month, just to try to keep each other alive, keep each other from doing something stupid. And it's been an incredible ride.
Yeah, so now 30 years later, you're at 5 campuses.
5 campuses, yes.
And multi-staff for sure, and just investing in so many different ministries and people there. How many staff members do you have, Bruce, off the top of your head?
Off the top of my head, I would say we're at between 80 and 90. I don't know exactly what that number is, but it's about that.
That's incredible. Who were some of your major influences as you look back at your life? People that just their investment in you is formative. Who would that be?
Well, the people who really discipled me were student pastors. I was in Plainview, Texas, and there were 2 student pastors who really invested in me. They saw something in me where they gave me an inordinate amount of their time and gave me a lot of responsibility as well. And I I began to have an understanding kind of what ministry was about based on my relationship to them. And so those two guys I'm forever grateful for. And then when I went to Cut and Shoot, the guy that was the pastor of the church was about 5 years older than me. We both went to Howard Payne, and he gave me so much opportunity. He was so selfless with the pulpit and with other responsibilities. The most challenging side of doing the work of ministry, he pulled me in the room with all those conversations as well. I look back on that and I think, what a gift. Amazing. Because he could have just left me over the corner doing the thing that I was supposed to be doing as an associate pastor. I was it was a small church, so I was doing the education and the student ministry stuff. But within a year, I was preaching every Sunday night.
Wow.
So this guy, of course, back then we preached on Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesdays.
I don't know how you did it. I really don't. I mean, it is everything. I'm whipped. I'm sounding so spoiled and just lazy, but I mean, I'm whipped after a Sunday morning. I give it my best. I promise you I do. Study, prepare. I do not know how you came back on Sunday night, got ready on Wednesday.
Oh, he just did it badly.
So he just took the old W.A. Criswell books off the shelf, preached his sermons or whatever it may be. Well, you and you introduced me to the Houston Church Planting Network, HCPN, and this is your heart. You've actually written a book on it, Collaboration for Multiplication, the story of the Houston Church Planting Network, and it captured me, just your desire to see churches working together. Where did that heart of collaboration come from? When did it begin? Tell me the story.
Yeah, I wish I could say that I had just biblical value for collaboration. You would think with all my study of Scripture that would have been really clear to me. But frankly, it only came when I began to realize that the call that God has on us as pastors and the leading of our churches is not even doable unless we collaborate. When we start looking at Acts 1:8 and we start thinking about how we're going to take the gospel to the ends of the earth, or even when we get beyond our own Jerusalem into Judea and Samaria, then all of a sudden we realize, I can't do that. I don't speak all those languages, and so how is it then that I can take some responsibility for what I think the Spirit's given us according to Acts 1:8, and that requires some collaboration. So literally, it wasn't until I began to think, I'm overwhelmed, and the overwhelm opened my mind and heart to what I think is clear in the Scripture all along, and that is that no one local church should just function on its own. We function in kind of this ethos for a city in the relationship of these churches.
Yeah. When did God give you that heart for the city? Like, was there an event? Was there a message that you were sitting under? What opened your eyes, softened your heart to say, man, I don't want to just be a pastor to my church, although that is my focus, but I have a heart for the city to come to know Jesus.
Right. I would think there was a seed planted that didn't grow until some pain showed up.
Okay.
So the seed planted came from a movement. I talk about this a lot, that we stand on the shoulders of a prayer movement that happened some 30 years ago in the city. And it was really led by Jim Harrington and a group of other people that were introducing this whole idea of a city-reaching movement. And so I was in some of those conversations, and I began to have an understanding of what is required for city movements. And we've seen this more internationally than we have in the United States or the continental United States. And so I would say that's what the seed was. But I was going from that experience to plant Clear Creek, and man, my hair's on fire, right?
Yeah.
When you're planting a church. I was also doing my doctorate, and I had all little kids, and it was kind of crazy, the timing for me. But it was being a pastor who had a heart to plant churches that I began to realize is like, no, this has to be a team sport where we collaborate together to bring all of our strengths to the table, but we just have to stack hands on the essentials that matter most, because, we can get so sideways on our differences so quickly.
Sure.
That when I began to think about doing that and started gather pastors around the table, is when I guess God just worked in me to love this, because I had to love it. It was going to be a fight. I could tell it was going to be a fight. And so I think sometimes God gives you a love for something because it's going to be hard, and you got to step in there and do it anyway.
So from that beginning standpoint of the seeds being planted to HCPN actually being a thing, what was the time period on that?
That was 15 years.
15 years of just praying, laboring, meeting with people, casting the vision of let's collaborate together to plant new churches.
Now, I wish I could say it was all that. No, I think probably most of that 15 years, the seed was there, but it hadn't germinated really.
Wow.
I was focused. I was like every other pastor who's focused on my church and doing my thing, building my ministry. And the Lord just broke me when, again, I started looking outside the house and thinking about planting churches that were cross-cultural or in other parts of the city that I knew without help, there's no way we can do this.
And so you start having meetings just with anybody that would be interested, and you got skin in the game because you're saying we'll staff it however we have to. We're certainly going to give to make it happen. And at first, you were telling us about a meeting that you had and said, anybody want this? And how many people?
Zero.
Zero.
No established church. So real briefly, when we first called people together to consider working together to plant churches across the city, we sent invitations to everyone that we knew had anything to do with church planting in their history. Okay. And so we filled the room with, I don't know, more than 100 probably people, and cast a very simple vision. It's just like, who will join us in taking responsibility for the city? We'd like to do this collaborative thing where we're really pouring into church planners and working together, and try to make it very clear that I wasn't going to insist on leading it. I could just be the guy who called the first meeting. I'd be happy to do that. And so we asked people to fill out a card if they were interested, and even having a second conversation. And no one from an established church filled out a card. Even when we responded to others, they said, no, not right now. And you know what that means is no.
Yeah.
That just means no. And I should back up and say this. Chad Clarkson, who was our pastor of church planting missions at that time and who is now the director of the Houston Church Planting Network, was also really instrumental in challenging me in my way of thinking about our local church. The church had grown really fast, and when churches grow fast, it's real tempting just to keep your eyes on home base because it's overwhelming enough in itself. But he really, just in really gentle ways, would call me back to because he and I would be sitting down developing these strategies for our Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria, and ends of the earth, and he would just call me back to where are we drawing these circles? If the Houston area is our circle, then how are we actually going to do that? So that's a callback to your previous question.
Yeah.
Just to say, I left that out, but Chad really had a big influence in that.
Yeah, Chad's a great leader. And in full disclosure to those listening to this podcast, I'm on the board of HCPN and am privileged to do it. I'm so grateful that you, along with others, asked me to come on and serve in this way, because it was at an HCPN meeting where I saw all of these pastors from all of these different networks representing all of these different denominations, and yet all working together to saturate the city with the good news of Jesus Christ. And you even have a statement in your book. I think I sent it to you the first time I read it and said, Bruce, this has wrecked me. And I might misquote it here. You can correct me. But it was something to the effect of, because people listening, there's some pastors listening, and they're in different cities all over North America, and they're thinking, man, I wish I had that. I mean, I wish we'd had it in Dallas, nothing against my brothers in Dallas, but there's just the sense of brotherhood and being on mission together and meeting together and being all in together. It just is unlike anything I've ever seen here in Houston. And the statement that you made in your book that just wrecked me is, and it has to do with working together, is you said, if we'll narrow the focus, we'll broaden the collaboration. Mm. And I had to read that like 3 or 4 times. Well, we'll narrow the focus. And you can work this out, but if I'm interpreting it right and if I'm remembering it correctly, it was, look, if we're gonna work together, we got to rally around something, and we got to narrow it down. What are we going to rally around? And HCPN chose, we're going to rally around the gospel, period.
That's right.
And when you narrow it down and you rally around the gospel, you broaden the means of collaboration, because you're not getting into the weeds on what one denomination embraces versus another network or not.
Right. Every group has their own hobby horse. And so part of the conversation was in the very beginning of developing all of this is that no hobby horses allowed. We all have to just say, if the gospel is clear and we can stack hands on the gospel, then we can work together. Mm-hmm. The other thing that had to be simple is that we're really focused on strengthening church planters. So there's a lot of things you can do when you're going to plant churches. For instance, when we do missions at Clear Creek, we use this language. We say, we do missions that results in church planting. Okay, so there are a lot of good things that other churches do that we don't do. Mm-hmm. And we don't do them because they're bad. We do them because we're narrowing our focus to say, we want this to result in church planting. Well, it's more clear for HCPN than that, right? We had more latitude at my local church than we do at HCPN. We're saying, no. We're focused on strengthening church planters because we believe that a healthy church planter will plant a healthy church, and a healthy church can help saturate the area where it's planted with the gospel of Jesus. And we also have the experience of knowing that focusing on the church planter is the way that multiplication can happen, because that planter will not only multiply disciples in the church, but we'll think about multiplying other leaders that will plant churches.
It's so good. And the other churches, which are churches plant churches, they're the ones that are investing in that planter. And what HCPN does is bring the sense of brotherhood, brings a sense of being on mission together in the city. It's just that iron sharpening iron. It's a beautiful thing. And I am just grateful for your leadership in it. What would you say, you got such a heart for collaboration, a heart for working together. What would you say are some of the biggest hindrances to locking arms in an organization like HCPN?
Yeah, some of them are very obvious and simple, but they're worth attention. Sometimes we are so busy as pastors that we really don't take time to get to know each other at all. And when we talk about collaboration, we say that the two wings of collaboration are mission and relationship.
Love that.
And mission and relationship. Now, I've been a part, I'm sure you have too, of groups of pastors get together. Oh, we ought to get together more, and it's all about the relationship. And what happens is we want the relationship, but sometimes our lives are so hectic that we have to say, I can't do it. As much as I want to do it, I can't do it. I got work to do. On the other hand, we've got people that, we can work together, but we're not really friends. They don't pray for me. I don't pray for them. We don't know each other well. Collaboration requires both of those things. So it requires really getting to know each other and care for each other, but we do so knowing that God has bound our lives together for purpose, and that purpose with HCPN is the multiplying of churches for the sake of the city. And so I think that busyness is one of the things. Obviously, ego. I mean, we all have to die a lot in order to be able to work together in ways where, we talk about how we have to pass the microphone around. We have to be great with being at the back of the room, the whole meeting, that we don't have to be the person up front. We don't have to have our way. All those things that are required for people to feel like there's room for them to engage. And when we talk to other leaders across the country who are wanting to start city movements, one of the things I warn them about is most of you are such strong leaders that you are the greatest threat to this happening. Mm-hmm. And you think, because you're such a strong leader, that you can make this happen. But the strength of your leadership has to be put on the back burner, because you got to lead in a way that other leaders can come forth. So good. And that's hard to do.
Mm-hmm. Man, so good. So tell me, what's the state of HCPN right now? I know you say you're a network. How many networks, how many church planners? Just give our listeners a sense of just this, when I say success, obviously we're giving God the glory for what's going on, but just to give them a sense of how God's blessed this from zero until right now today.
Yeah, the count is there are 37 different networks that claim to be part of HCPN. When I say they claim to be, we're not claiming them, they're claiming us. They're saying we're in, to collaborate for the sake of planting churches in the city. And 138 churches who have done this. Now, they have varying degrees of commitment. We have some churches that commit to help financially with HCPN, but all of these churches are saying we want to be a part of planting churches in the city. We want to find our place in the game. And when you have that, when you come to the table together with that, there's always energy behind the conversation. There's energy because of the shared relationship, but because of the shared mission, there's energy.
That's wonderful. What do you see is next for HCPN as you're just praying about the future? And I want to get to prayer before we close out this conversation. What do you see the future? What are you looking at next? What do you think is the next big thing on the horizon?
Well, Houston is a city that has a large number of churches already. What we really hope to see is 400 churches as a part of HCPN. And the reason we pick that number is it's about 10% of the churches that of all denominations and all faiths, whatever, that are in the city. And that would allow us to actually have the kind of influence that could create a tipping point. Okay. We want to see gospel saturation, and we think that brings real renewal, not just to churches, but to people. And then it allows those churches to work together for the sake of the city, to serve the city. And so a lot of the brokenness in the city can really be addressed if we can reach a tipping point with people who are committed to the gospel and planting the gospel in the city. So
400 churches, so we're 300 and something away.
Right, and so part of the pathway to get there is we're trying to do more, as you know, we're trying to do more and more that is decentralized. And so different sections of the city then, leaders are emerging in those sections of the city to really lead part of the community of HCPN in their different regions so that we can develop more relationship in that specific geography instead of looking at the city as a whole.
Yeah, well, that's something to pray for. And on that note of praying, one of the things that I've learned just from being a part of HCPN, the emphasis on prayer. Every meeting we go to, it's not only communicated, but it's practiced. And just talk about that. That's one of the things that, from a leadership standpoint, a pastor standpoint, it's been so inspiring to me that this is not going to happen without a prayer movement. Talk about the role of prayer in HCPN and really just the life of a believer in a church. This podcast, a lot of people listening. We know as pastors, I always say this, if there's an area that a Christian always say, what area could you grow in? There's usually two ways, sharing my faith and prayer. If I could grow in those two ways. So talk to us a little bit, Bruce, because I know you model this and are intentional in this. Talk about the importance of prayer in something like this.
Well, one of the strengths of HCPN is that being around other people, the strengths of their lives, get poured out into your life. And so I'm not the guy that's really brought the prayer emphasis to HCPN. There are a couple of other people on our board that are such men of prayer, always emphasizing prayer. And as we have prayed together at HCPN, we've been convicted that prayer has to be a priority. While we are convicted about that already, some of what we're learning about city-reaching movements is that of the 5 key things in city-reaching movements, unified prayer and fasting across the city seems to be a part of that. And so because prayer is you think about all that prayer does. When people pray together, they know each other because it's one of the most intimate things you can do. Mm-hmm. Typically, people are asking about, how can I pray for you? And what are we telling them? We're telling them about that deep thing about us that nobody really sees or knows unless they ask, right? Yeah. And then we're praying for each other. So there's that kind of connection. It's also an exercise of humility. This is not about me. This is about God and what He's doing in the world and among us. And it's a corporate declaration of our deep need for God to do what we can't do. We're doing this work, but we know we desperately need Him. When people are at HCPN and there's a monthly gathering and people are around the table together, and one of the things that we're doing as we pray is we're praying for the city, but then we're praying for one another. And what happens is we're praying for one another is that you've got these people who might have a hint of competition in their spirit, and then they're going to go before God and they're going to just cheer for the guy across the table, that the Lord might use him mightily, that he might see that the Holy Spirit move powerfully in His church, and all of a sudden, all the things that maybe I have a little jealousy over, I've taken before the Lord, and that changes my heart. Yeah,
I love everything about it, man. I love the fact that when we pray together, just what you said, you just begin to see that person's church. It becomes a burden for you. and you celebrate what's going on in their life. You hurt with them when they're going through pains or experiencing, because you're hearing it as they pray and share those prayer requests with you. And I love the emphasis on prayer, so much so for HCPN, you started a movement called Awaken Houston, 50 Days of Prayer, and it's just been great. How many churches are participating in Awaken Houston now?
Well, all 138 churches are invited to participate, and the way that works is we send out a devotion with a video inviting them all to pray. So I don't have the data as to actually how many people prayed this last year, but I will say that even beyond Awaken Houston, this past year we did like a month of fasting and prayer, and there were lots of churches that participated all across the city. We were blown away by the eager participation, where pastors were taking the material that was put together into their churches and praying not just for HCPN, of course. I mean, praying for all that God's doing in their church as well as churches across the city. But when churches are feeling responsibility for the city, that's half the battle, because now I don't view the world just as my little world of what's going on around me, but what God is doing with us together all across the city. Well,
I really encourage those listening that are pastors, if you want to get something like this started in your city, reach out to HCPN. This is one of the reasons we exist as an organization, is to help city movements all across not just North America, but the world. So any pastors listening, if you're interested in this, you can contact me, you can contact Bruce, HCPN. You can find us on the website there. We would love to help you out. We would love to share resources with you so that you can get these things started in your city. Bruce, as we close this out, man, we've talked a lot about your calling. We talked a lot about you leading HCPN. Tell us a little bit, just in closing, about your family and how we can pray for you as people are being introduced to you, some for the very first time, some know you're aware of your ministry, but for the very first time, hearing you and hearing your heart. And I would say this, this is, we talk about this being forward. One of the things that I hope that you can apply to your life as you're listening to this podcast is not being about yourself. Just as churches aren't about themselves, we're being about the kingdom of Christ. Life is not about us. And as we give ourselves away, this is part of discipleship, there's more joy, there's more excitement, there's more life. Life shrinks when we make it about ourselves. And so one of the lessons and one of the takeaways from this conversation, I think that you can take in your own personal life, is make sure you're giving yourself away. But as we close, Bruce, tell us a little bit about your family and something we can be praying for you for in these days.
Thank you. I have 3 grown daughters. So Susan, my wife, and I have been married for 40 years.
She's been with you from the beginning of this church planting thing, man.
She has, and she's been right in the fat middle of it. She's amazing. But my 3 adult daughters, they're all married, and I have 9 grandchildren. So I'm that guy that is just overwhelmed, over the moon.
Loving it.
Yeah, with my grandkids.
What's your grandpa's name? What do they call you?
I'm Pops.
Pops,
so
all right.
It's Nana and Pops.
Nana and Pops.
And what I've learned is with a grandchild, when they show up, there's just one. It's Nana and Pops. And so if they see Nana, they say, "Where's Pops?" And if they see Pops, they say, "Where's Nana?" Because, you can't exist except the 2 of you.
That's awesome.
And, it's so much fun. And life is good. Life is good in our church right now. I'm so grateful for that. But I guess the thing that we're praying most about is what's the next big step that the Lord has for us as a church. We're celebrating 30 years as a church literally on October the 29th.
Okay.
And so I'll be casting vision on that day and trying to make it clear for the future,
awesome.
What we're about.
Awesome. Well, man, we're going to be praying for you. Thank you again for your leadership and just the vision of HCPN. And Bruce Wesley is a name, a voice that you need to follow, listen to. Great pastor, great preacher, and appreciate you so much being on with us today.
It's such a pleasure. Thank you.